why should we keep making a hazardous product when we know how to make a safer one? It's right in the email. And so the jury, by the time the jury goes to deliberate, they've seen that email at least 4 or 5 times.
Yeah.
4 or 5 times. Why should we continue to make a hazardous product when we know how to make a safer one? Out of the mouth of a scientist that participated in making the safer one in Europe, which was resulted in, by the end of 2017, there was no more POA-based, glyphosate-based herbicide sold by any company in Europe. They banned it.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Lindley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic food label to distinguish organic crops grown in healthy soils and organic livestock raised on well-managed pasture, all without synthetic fertilizers and toxic chemicals. You just heard from agricultural economist Chuck Benbrook, who has testified in many lawsuits involving pesticides and human health. Chuck recently appeared in Anthony Swa's gripping movie Organic Rising. He was also featured in a 1993 episode of Frontline titled Our Children's Food, where he made the case that acceptable levels of pesticide in food pose a great threat to kids because what we deem as acceptable is based on the weight of an adult, not a child. So Chuck is a tireless activist against the use of toxic chemicals in our food, even though he's lost jobs and been the target of smear campaigns. Here, Chuck talks about his story and his deep knowledge of glyphosate and Bayer Monsanto.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm talking today to Chuck Benbrook, and Chuck, I'm looking forward to this. This will be a little more of a conversation than a formal interview, which is why we got connected. I want to learn what you're doing and what you're up to and what your thoughts are. I just saw you last week. I finished watching Organic Rising, which is, I thought, a fantastic film. Anthony did a very good job with it, and I was really impressed. It's got a lot of people I've interviewed in it, and then some I haven't that I ought to. And he really takes a very beautiful overview at organic from a big perspective. And you're very good in it. You're very good.
You know, I think that interview might have been recorded a decade ago.
Yeah.
Several years anyway.
Yeah. He said he finished filming it in 2018. And he's been making it, editing it together ever since.
Well, I guess filmmakers and farmers share a trait. Perseverance furthers.
Yeah, now he has just as a farmer, he has the challenge of selling his crop. So getting to see the movie is not easy.
Yeah.
Well,
the coverage and portrayal of organic in film is kind of a lively topic now. We've had Kiss the Ground and Common Ground and Organic Rising, and I'm sure I'm forgetting another one. And it's I guess we're all hoping that one of these films really breaks into the general population.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I don't think Kiss the Ground or A Common Ground mentions the word organic.
Kiss the Ground does a couple times, but
Okay.
Common Ground was when there was some change in the ideology of the filmmaking crew and or the financiers of the film, and any mention of organic apparently was systematically purged in the final cut of the film. It's surprising to me that in none of the interviews that made it onto the film that the word organic wasn't used. I mean, I must have used it 20 times in the interview, but I thought it was well done. I didn't really I didn't understand the degree to which the the producers and the sponsors of the film had decided to disparage organic as a way to promote regenerative agriculture and the new Regenified label. But that has become, clearer today.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, that's one of the things I actually wanted to talk to you about. I know that you've been really pondering the rise of regenerative agriculture as a brand. I wouldn't call it a movement. I'd call it a brand that's being developed. And what are your thoughts about that? I mean, we've seen some extremely well-meaning people who have done a lot of work to try and bring conventional chemical agriculture towards organic,
Mhm.
and without apparently wanting to mention the word. I'm just curious. I know that at this point, well, I'd like to hear your thoughts. Yeah.
I I wish I was in my other office, because one of my most cherished mementos of my long career came from a dear friend of mine named Lynn Richardson, who was the editor of California Farmer and Agrochemical Age back in the 80s. And he did my absolute favorite cover for an ag industry magazine. It was the cover story was on low input sustainable agriculture, or LISA,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a cartoon caricature of a guy driving a manure spreader big rig, and out on the boom there was a Holstein cow sitting on it, holding on for dear life as it went through the field. It's so classic. And um, going back all the way into the 80s, there was a general understanding that organic would be a heavy lift for a lot of farmers, particularly large scale row crop farmers that had already bought into, at the time, large scale equipment. I mean, they just, it wasn't an easy thing for them to diversify their rotations and get some pasture and some animals back into the system. So even back in the 80s, those of us who were promoting diversification of approaches to growing food recognized there needed to be something between organic and conventional agriculture, a way station. And I think as is clear now, we need that way station for a couple reasons. One is to give large scale conventional farmers, a goal and some economic reward for changing their systems in a way, for example, that improves soil health and captures more carbon in the soil, or helps protect water quality in their area. Um, a lot of those farmers, they're not going to go the rest of the way to organic, but still having a place for them to go to get them off of the conventional chemical treadmill that so many of them are on is a good thing. Now, we all we all also recognize the need for something between conventional and organic, so that farmers in organic transition can get paid at least some premium in the 3 years of the transition, which, for certainly my whole career, the cost of going through the transition in the absence of a premium has been one of the major roadblocks for the transition to organic. So yeah, there's a need for these alternative labels, whether you're going all the way to organic or not. And I guess, let's see, just in during my career, we've had LISA, low input sustainable agriculture, obviously organic agriculture, and now we're talking about regenerative agriculture, and sometimes regenerative organic mixed together. So obviously, there hasn't the community hasn't coalesced around a set of terms and concepts, and there's a sort of a constant shuffling to come up with the new thing that will capture the minds and hearts of both marketers and consumers. And for a while, of course, it was the non-GMO project and the non-GMO label, which, as you know, Dave, some of the prominent, widely respected leaders in the organic community were behind the beginning of the non-GMO project, and they felt it was a necessary evil to get serious about backing up the non-GMO claim in organic. And what a great example of the law of unintended consequences. The non-GMO label took off. The people that controlled it really moved on to other goals other than protecting the validity of the non-GMO claim in organic, and marketed it widely in the food industry. And now we've got non-GMO orange juice when there's no genetically engineered oranges on the market.
Right.
So
right. Non-GMO water.
Yeah. So the short answer to your question is, yeah, there is a need and a legitimate role for these intermediate labels between conventional and organic. But the problem is the opportunity to take control of the substance and the content of these interim labels by commercial interests. It's very strong, and when you have, like, take regenerative ag today, the kind of there's more money being spent on PR in to promote the regenerative label than there is in research on sustainable and organic agriculture. I mean, it's just it's just so regrettable that unfortunately these interim labels are so vulnerable to greenwashing and really corporate interests, food companies taking them over to serve their own needs, which is mostly to figure out a way to either make more money from what they have been doing or give them cover so they don't have to change. It's one of those two things. So I think these alternative labels, for the most part, have set back the effort to try to change the food system because none of the alternative labels really put in the work and the credibility and the verification that the organic label does. And without that, it kind of they kind of become meaningless.
Yeah. Well, the thing I find most disturbing, Chuck, isn't just that they're meaningless, but they're actually being weaponized against organic. And that is happening. And, I've seen from Regenify their fundraising deck, and the second thing they have is basically an attack on organic. And I hear it over and over, and I go, God, what is going on here? I understood from some of the people who are really pushing regenerative as a term and as a concept. I understood that they wanted to keep their distance from organic because the farmers they were trying to sell this to didn't like organic. They were good old salt of the earth Midwestern farmers, and they didn't believe in this hippie stuff from the coasts. Okay, but that's different from attacking organic. And I think at this point, it's not just an empty threat. I think they're quite effective. You go to talk to people in Congress, and they're quite excited about regenerative, and they're not very excited about organic.
Well, unfortunately, a lot of the problems with the organic community and the organic movement have been self-inflicted. And I've been bemoaning this fact and trying to deal with it for my entire career. But it's very difficult, to see how we're going to pull out of the sort of the tailspin that we're in now. In terms of kiss the ground and common ground, with the focus on soil health and carbon sequestration and climate change, et cetera, it is definitely understandable that they wouldn't want to set forth transition to organic as that's where everybody's got to get to. You're talking about 1% of the land in the Midwest and in row crop agriculture areas that are organic versus on the coast, it's 10% or more. So most farmers on the coast where there's substantial organic acreage, they understand what is required to transition. Many of them are growing both organic and conventional crops, and for the most part, the major growth in the organic industry in the fruit and vegetable sectors of the food system are driven by a lack of demand and not the capacity to produce the food. I mean, I've talked to innumerable scientists and farmers in the Pacific Northwest in fruit and vegetable country, and most of them say, oh, we could have been 80% organic by now if the market demand was there. In the regions, and now they're, I think Washington State is close to 20% organic on tree fruit, which is I think the largest penetration in a major crop. But again, most of the people in the industry say, oh, there's no reason why we couldn't do it. I think in Washington State, I think 90 or 95% organic in fruits and vegetables, it would be totally feasible. And the only reason the other 5% couldn't make it is that there's some more difficult to resolve imbalance in soil nutrients and micronutrients or pest problems, something that is undermining the efficacy of the organic systems that are working really well throughout the state.
From my lowly seat in the bleachers here, I have seen a lot of well-established organic farms struggling in recent years in fruits and vegetables. And I haven't spent much time in Washington, but in California, this is certainly true. But I also see that 40% of the organic food is being imported, of the fruits and vegetables being imported from other places. And I think that the reason that these farms are struggling is just price. And the reason the price is so low is other places are paying very low labor costs, and fruit and vegetables have high labor.
Sure. Well, don't forget, Dave, on fresh fruits and vegetables, seasonality has a huge impact on the global flow of food. And whether you and I think it's a wise thing to put blueberries on an airplane from Chile to New York in the middle of the winter, there's going to be a certain amount of high quality fresh produce moving around the globe, to meet fresh market demands in population centers. And in terms of, there's a lot of fruit and vegetables that are coming in from Mexico.
Yes.
But again, most of them in the winter, when you're not growing tomatoes in Vermont or strawberries in Minnesota during the winter months. So, there's always going to be some imports, and
for sure. But let me tell a story. One of my trips out there, I went to Mill Valley. And I went to the Whole Foods, which I always go to Whole Foods all over the place because it's like my temperature, my thermometer to see what's happening. And this was in mid-August, height of tomato season. I just visited a farm that had some acres of tomatoes untouched. They were about to till under because they had no market. And I went to the Whole Foods in Mill Valley, and the only certified organic tomatoes were from Mexico. I know the farm there too. They're hydroponic, certified as organic. And I thought, what is wrong with this picture? It wasn't just about seasonality. It was the height of tomato
Well,
season.
yeah, there's, I mean, just the carbon cost of shipping the tomatoes from Mexico to the U.S., should give anybody a pause.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that there isn't crazy stuff going on. I mean, I've even I've seen blueberries from Chile in uh, foodie markets in Seattle in the middle of berry season.
Right.
The greatest berry growing area in North America is in the Skagit Valley. So yeah, I mean, there's crazy stuff that goes on, but a lot of it is Whole Foods wants to have a business relationship with a relatively small number of large players, and large players have farms in Mexico and they have farms in around Watsonville and in the Skagit Valley and uh, in other places where they can grow particular crops and year round. So the the market has been squeezing out uh, a lot of local production that could be riper and hence more nutrient dense and more flavorful. It's really a shame.
Let me ask you something that you said. You said a lot of the problems that organic is facing are self-inflicted. I'm curious what you meant by that. You didn't elaborate on that.
Um, the organic community, in terms of the rules and regulations and the important details of what is required to be an organic farmer and how the certification process works, et cetera, basically has changed very little for 25 years. It has proven to be exceedingly difficult to make any substantive changes in either the law or the regulation, and the amount of time and effort required by the USDA, by allied industry organizations, growers, food companies, to go through the rulemaking process for even fairly insignificant changes is just so out of proportion. And as a result, the organic farming and food community, organic retailing, all stages of the supply chain have not been able to innovate nearly to the degree that would be possible if people could come to consensus on some of the changes. The ongoing fight over the scale of organic farming, which I mean, it's so critical in the livestock sector, the livestock half of the plate, but it's also important on the plant side, where scale issues are so important. And then in terms of crops, and especially fruits and vegetables, the high value crops, the hydroponic debate has just been, it's really been a devastating setback for the community.
Mm-hmm.
I think the wrong decisions have been made. It's very difficult to explain them or defend them. And I think it's one of the things that's chipped away at the confidence and understanding that the consumer has in organic food. And another thing I'll say, and I feel very strongly about this, the U.S. Department of Agriculture has basically sat on its hands as the conventional food industry, and mostly the fertilizer, pesticide, GMO part of the food industry, has invested heavily and continuously in a very well orchestrated campaign to discount or undermine the clear environmental and human health benefits of organic food. it's just been really sad to watch that unfold. And the difference in the consumer adoption and market demand for organic, and in some of the European countries that have not had that at the institutional level, the USDA of Austria, the USDA of Switzerland, hasn't gone out of its way to back up the Carl Winters and other people who've made a big part of their career uh, uh, trying to undermine the USDA data, the published USDA research that shows clearly that organic food is better for you nutritionally and in terms of pesticide residues and risk. So I I hope that the day will come when new leadership comes into USDA, and it will have to be from the secretary's office on down, and they fix a lot of these problems that are embedded in USDA policy. There's a USDA policy on the books that says, okay, you could talk about some environmental benefits of organic, but USDA employees can't say that organic food is healthier for you because that hasn't been proven.
Yeah.
Well, that's a really devastating problem for the organic community, because the USDA scientists that go out and do a comparative trial of organic tomatoes versus conventional tomatoes and find that the organic tomatoes are healthier, have essentially no pesticide residues, they can get away with getting a paper in a technical journal as long as they just stick to the numbers and don't use words like it's healthier. But it's just not allowed, and that's why some of the scientists have had to leave the USDA over the last 20 or 30 years, because they just weren't willing to downplay the significance of their results. And I don't quite understand the reticence in the scientific community and the public health community to call USDA out on this. And it's really not just USDA, it's EPA and FDA too. The power of the food industry, the pesticide industry, the Farm Bureau, the Cotton Council, soybean growers, it's so monumental and significant in DC. And it targets every policy, every decision that could steer the quality of food in the direction of the harvests that are coming off the good organic farms in the country. They just, nothing goes without a fight. And because they have so many more resources to work with, and they're so deeply embedded in the political infrastructure of the country, it's really hard to overcome that. And somehow somebody has got to call the USDA on this and make them change. So am I going to live long enough to see that happen? I don't know. I don't know, but it's really important that more people that understand the science speak out more forcefully about the enormous benefits that organic food and farming has to deliver, and most immediately in the fruit, vegetable, nut area, where yes, the food diet public health connection in this country has a lot to do with calories, fat, sugar, salt, which has been almost the sole focus of nutrition research and nutrition labeling. But nobody gets healthy as they grow up and stays healthy without getting an appropriate amount, an essential amount of about 25 micronutrients, many of which are phytochemicals. And phytochemical content is really where organic excels consistently on the plant side. It's the total antioxidant capacity is between 15 and 25% higher in 90% of the rigorous comparative trials. Well, Dave, just think about it for a minute. You go and buy a pint of good organic blueberries that are already are way high in antioxidants. You get a 25% boost. That's like a whole serving of conventional blueberries. It's like a whole new serving with, guess what? No calories and no cost. So why are benefits of that magnitude so hard to convey to the American public, to the public health community, to American Dietetic Association, to the Congress, to shareholders? And the answer is there's so many people dragging it down, fogging it up, and just outright opposing it, including some, as we just spoke, who consider themselves part of the organic community that really wants to promote regenerative agriculture now. I mean, it's really something. And while we're on this topic, on the animal side, the human health, public health benefits of organic on the animal side are all about the fatty acid profile. When animals eat corn and soybeans as the primary components in their diet, they make a lot of omega-6s. The omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of corn oil is 40-1. So if you feed a cow or a pig corn, you're feeding them omega-6s, right? Which is why feedlot beef, CAFO pork, CAFO chicken has an omega-6 to omega-3 ratio between 6 and 10. 6 is not heart healthy. 6 is not heart healthy. It's not terrible. 10 is definitely not heart healthy. You feed those animals a forage-based diet, feeds that have a more favorable omega-6 to omega-3, and you can easily get it down to 4-1, which most scientists agree is at least heart healthy neutral. 100% grass-fed milk is 1-1. Mm-hmm. All over the world, whether it's coming from a goat or a sheep or a cow. And there's just no debate about this at this time. And same thing with meat. So the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio in hamburger for conventional feedlot beef, it's in the 8-1 to 10-1 range. Again, you put that animal on a forage, finish it on grass, finish it in a feedlot, but with grass-based feeds, you can get it down to 4-1, or even a fully organic grass-fed steer, even if it spent some time in the feedlot, has almost 1-1. And so in terms of cardiovascular disease, obesity, type 2 diabetes, all of the metabolic syndrome problems, which are kind of the macro issue with food quality, diet, health, the cheapest way for society to really make a mark on that is ban corn oil use in food. Just ban it. We're already subsidizing 40% of the corn to be put into ethanol. Let's subsidize another 10% of it and get all that omega-6 out of the food supply. And then you wouldn't have politicians starting to say, well, by God, we're going to have to make sure that GLP-1 medications are available to everybody who is overweight or obese or dealing with type 2 diabetes in the United States. We're talking about 100 million people.
Right.
And the cost of providing those types of medications to 100 million Americans, I mean, we could transform the entire food system to organic for a fraction of the cost, and a big chunk of the problems almost certainly would go away because of the improvement in the quality of the food. But we can't, as a country, we cannot wrap our minds around that. And that's what really frustrates me and worries me.
Yeah. Well, it's not by mistake, of course. There's some very talented people convincing us that that is impossible and a crazy idea. And in fact, those same people will then go on to say, organic is the food of the elites.
Mhm.
Meaning that, of course, working people can't afford this food. This is just for people who make a lot of money. And you're suggesting the opposite, which is that as a society, we can't afford to keep eating this so-called conventionally grown food because it's making us sick and we're all going to end up paying for it.
Well, we can't afford it. We're a very, very rich country. And what I'm afraid of is we get if the Democrats win, especially if they win big, there's going to be a lot of pressure for some big moves on multiple fronts, and there'll be a big campaign led by a lot of progressives to make sure that anybody on Medicare or Medicaid that wants a GLP-1 and meets the criteria of being, either pre-type 2 diabetes or obese, should be given those drugs. I mean,
a GLP-1, excuse me, is like Ozempic, something like
yeah,
that.
It will go via, it's the drugs that help trigger the feeling of fullness. So you're not hungry all the time. You don't eat as much. And, there's the evidence thus far is that they work well. They seem to have even some unexpected benefits. But most scientists that I've talked to about it also suspect there's going to be down the road some adverse consequences as well that just haven't been picked up yet. I mean, if you look at essentially any pesticide or any drug, whether it's used in animals or people, yes, they can do wonders in dealing with what they were designed to do, but almost none of them do it with absolutely no impact on anything else that we care about. It's just the nature of biological systems. If you do something to perturb it in one way that changes its direction, it's likely to have some other consequences that were not anticipated, and some of those other consequences will regrettably turn out to be unfortunate. So we'll just see how it plays out. But I feel that the consumer health benefits of organically grown food now, both on the livestock side and the plant side, and this is despite the hydroponics and despite the organic CAFOs, are so significant and so needed at this time to address some of society's biggest challenges in terms of quality of life and economics, that somehow we've got to figure out a way to overcome the opposition and the corporate efforts to cloud these benefits for the general public, because it's not a question of research or technology at this point. Now, certainly some investment in infrastructure is going to be needed. I mean, I would love to see the country have as a goal, reducing by 2/3 the amount of corn that's used in feedlots for both cattle and pigs, and and replace that with forage-based feeds that are nutrient rich for the animals. Well, that's going to require a lot more alfalfa in the Midwest, which, which will be the biggest change. So, there's going to have to be more forage harvesters and storage, and maybe we should start thinking about converting ethanol plants to alfalfa dehydration plants or other biomass dehydration plants, so that we have a way to store and relatively cheaply ship what's really going to become, critical new and growing parts of U.S. agriculture, if we're going to heal what ails Midwest agriculture. There's no fixing Midwest agriculture if it stays a two-crop region. It's just we're just all kidding ourselves. There's no package of technology that's going to make it possible to grow the amount of corn and soybeans in the Midwest in a two-crop rotation without significant adverse impacts on the environment and increasingly high costs to the growers, and public health costs that are associated with the fertilizers and pesticides and other things that don't stay on the farm.
Yeah.
So, I've been trying to get people to understand that the big change in U.S. agriculture, we have to basically shift most of the crop production, irrigated crop production in the West, that goes to feed cattle, dairy cattle, pigs, chickens. Move those animals have to go back into the middle part of the country, into the north where it rains. And so instead of growing all that alfalfa out west, where it takes 5 acre feet per year to grow 5 cuttings of alfalfa, I mean, Jesus Christ, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Let's grow it in Minnesota and Wisconsin and South Dakota, Illinois, all the way across the Midwest. They can grow alfalfa like you wouldn't believe, and rain fed. But they need, obviously in those parts of the country, the infrastructure to manage it has to come from somewhere. So you shift the animal feed crops, alfalfa, irrigated pasture, and corn. Three out of 4 of the top irrigation water users in the West: Arizona, New Mexico, California, Oregon. 3 out of the 4 are to feed livestock.
Yeah.
And California has got this campaign up to increase the export of processing milk.
Right.
I mean, come on. Milk, it's heavy. You don't want to ship it to China.
Right.
So get those crops out, and then basically the federal government will buy half of the water rights, roughly, from the entities that control the water rights, because they're not going to need all that water because they're not growing alfalfa or corn or even cotton, and basically force more farmers in the West to just grow foods that people eat, including nice nutrient dense fruits and vegetables and nuts. And then the money that's been subsidizing the animal feed crops in the West shifts into the Midwest to basically subsidize and motivate and reward the transition to at least a 3-crop rotation with a cover crop or 2 in there. That's the big change. So the sort of the pressure points are unraveling water politics in the West, so that this kind of nationwide shift in what public subsidies are used for and what change they bring about. That's number one. And number 2 is the biofuels industry. in the Midwest, it's out of control, and it needs to shrink and change from ethanol for cars to aviation fuels and other fuels and liquids that um, we have been making from petroleum or getting from natural gas, but can be made from feedstocks. Because there's always going to be a biofuels industry, but the question is how big is it and what is it producing?
Yeah.
And I think the transition in the biofuels industry is for the Midwest. Again, no, I don't see any big changes happening until that's dealt with. And you gotta. I mean, if you want to be an optimist about it, Tim Walz is the right kind of politician, and Amy Klobuchar. I mean, they're both lifelong proponents of biofuels, but they also understand about the climate change, and they need to sell to the corn growers and sort of conventional ag in the Midwest. We're not going to end biofuels. We're going to shift them
Yeah.
and accomplish some other things at the same time.
So Chuck, I got a couple questions. I don't want to run out of time. One question is just looking at the American food system. And I don't just say agriculture because without stores, without distribution, it's a system without processing. Is it, in your opinion, getting better, getting worse, or staying the same?
Well, in terms of its impact on public health, I think it's getting worse. And I particularly think that it is indefensible when you think about how good our food system could be and how positive the impact of food quality would have been had U.S. agriculture mimicked more Italian or French agriculture. When you go to Europe and you look at the food that people eat, it's really, really different. And then you look at the people, they are really, really different. I mean, there are overweight people in Europe, and unfortunately, they're getting to be more and more of them. And why? Because more international food companies are bringing the U.S. model, to other countries. I mean, the evidence of the adverse effects of ultra processed food and the kind of food that make up half of the daily calories in the U.S. diet, in countries like India and Pakistan and China and South Korea. I mean, it's really incredibly worrisome. So
Yeah. No, it's criminal.
I think that I think it would. The great tragedy is how much better and safer the food could be, and we're just not going down that road.
Okay, so I know that you were involved in the Monsanto lawsuits on glyphosate.
Mhm.
Can you tell me about that? What was your involvement? How did it turn out? It's a big deal. It's a
Oh,
big.
it's still going. I'm
Yeah.
still involved. So I was called in the fall of 2016 by a lawyer that worked for one of the first firms that filed cases. Um, just to remind everyone, in March of 2015, the International Agency for Research on Cancer issued a surprising and what I've characterized as shocking classification of glyphosate as a probable human carcinogen. I'd been following glyphosate-based herbicides and Roundup since the early '80s professionally as part of my work, and I knew the science, I knew what the study showed, and I thought IARC might classify it as a possible human carcinogen. And when they came out with the probable, I mean, I just knew it was like it was a tsunami uh, scale disruption. And yeah, that's exactly what happened, because then lawyers started recruiting people, people with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So IARC says glyphosate and glyphosate-based herbicides are probable human carcinogens, and the evidence is strongest for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So less than a year later, the first cases had been filed by there were 4 firms that got into it early on, and they had filed first dozens of cases, and then hundreds, and then thousands, and now it's probably pushing 160,000 cases have been filed in the U.S. I got contacted basically 2 years before the first case went to trial. So I was part of the original team of experts. I was the liability and regulatory expert among the experts. So there were 2 or 3 oncologists, a epidemiologist, a toxicologist. It really is part of the trial team in all cases, and usually an industrial hygienist who could speak to efforts to reduce applicator exposure, mixer loader exposures. But my job was to assess the degree to which Monsanto played it straight with the science, played it straight with the EPA, played it straight with its customers, the farmers, and then also I covered the data on the explosive rise in the use, because I published on use of glyphosate, and so I started working in the fall of 2016, and so that's coming on. It's coming on what, 8 years now, and for several of those years, I was putting in 30, 40, 50 hours a week on the litigation. And the day I started working with the lawyers and the other experts, there's no question about it, I knew about more aspects of glyphosate and glyphosate herbicides than anybody involved with the litigation. Because, I published and had done work for 20 years on use. I had followed all the regulation. Roundup was a big deal when I ran that subcommittee on the House Ag Committee in 81, 82, 83 because of the IBT scandal. So I already knew a lot about the major stages. And somebody pay me well to put 30, 40 hours a week for 8 years into something. It's like, I could write 4 PhD dissertations in that time. So at this point, I have a really broad command, and it's another big part of my job is to assess all the international regulatory actions on glyphosate and glyphosate-based herbicides. So I've written about 22 versions of my expert report, and I've been deposed 20 plus times over the last 8 years. So, and my work continues. The number of firms involved and the number of cases, of course, is way down. Out of roughly 160,000 that have been filed, probably 125 or 130,000 have been resolved. So, Bayer/Monsanto they're through the bulk of the inventory of cases, but there's a lot of strong cases left, and also there's several hundred to 1,000, maybe as many as 2,000 new cases every year, because there's 65 to 70,000 new cases of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma diagnosed annually. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if in the next couple of years, there won't be other cancers that are successfully included in the litigation. The science is kind of catching up on some of the other cancers. So, Bayer / Monsanto, they've got a very rough road ahead. And as you know, some of the jury awards in the last year have been, very sizable, even after they get reduced. 10 to $40 million per plaintiff is not unusual. And if you've got 30,000 more to go, do the math. It's such a big number that Bayer Monsanto has. They've got to do something to put a cap on it, and we're all watching to see how that plays out.
Are those large sums that are being awarded because Monsanto knew and were hiding it?
That's a major part of it. So in this kind of mass tort litigation, there's what's called compensatory damages and the possibility of punitive damages. Compensatory damages are added medical costs, lost wages, lost job, etc. So they're things that a plaintiff can actually put a number on. And I think the highest compensatory damages, maybe are as much as 40 or a little 40 million or a little higher. And that would be for a young person that got really sick, had 8 rounds of chemo and a stem cell transplant, and may have even passed away. But punitive damages are part of the law to punish corporations for unacceptable malfeasance, knowing about risks and not doing anything about it, knowing about risks and telling the regulatory agencies that there's nothing there, no reason to worry. So it's bad behavior and failure to live up to their obligations. If you look at what Monsanto said about Roundup over the years, they had the Monsanto pledge and a number of other sort of corporate pledges, but their taglines, safety is job number one. The safety of our customers is the most important thing. And so when you read what they said they were doing and what they were pledged to versus what they did, it really gets to juries. So to give you an example from my work, there's 3 or 4 internal emails that are the super hot of the hot documents. And one of them is from one of their scientists that was based in Europe and worked with Monsanto Europe in getting Roundup, keeping it on the market in the EU. And he was engaged in an email chain with the brass in St. Louis, the top people. And basically, Monsanto Europe had already agreed to take the high-risk POEA surfactants, the polyethoxylated toluamine surfactants that make U.S. Roundup much more toxic and dangerous for applicators and mixer and loaders than it has to be. In Europe, the European regulators were pushing them on that, and they decided to voluntarily give up the POEA-based label formulations that they were selling in most of the rest of the world. And they replaced the POEAs with another type of surfactant, quaternary ammonium surfactant, which especially lowered the genotoxicity by 20-fold, 30-fold, and possibly more. And so this guy this scientist sends an email to his the brass in St. Louis. He says, I won't get it exactly right, but basically he says, why should we keep making a hazardous product when we know how to make a safer one? It's right in the email. And so the jury, by the time the jury goes to deliberate, they've seen that email at least 4 or 5 times.
Yeah.
4 or 5 times. why should we continue to make a hazardous product when we know how to make a safer one? Out of the mouth of a scientist that participated in making the safer one in Europe, which was resulted in by the end of 2017, there was no more POA-based, glyphosate-based herbicide sold by any company in Europe. They banned it. So basically, the Monsanto lawyers would start out saying, no regulatory agency in the world has ever banned Roundup. That's part of their opening statement. Well, it just so happens that Europe, 27 countries banned it. And of course, that's one of the sort of, for the plaintiff side, that's a gotcha moment. When in an opening statement, the lawyer says, red is red, and then you have an email where they say, well, yeah, we know red is red, but we're going to call it blue. That doesn't, that really has a visceral impact on juries, and they really then begin to doubt a lot of other things that the defense lawyers and the defense experts said. Once they get shown to be either cherry picking data or misconstruing the science or whatever, 2 or 3 times during a 6-week trial, that plants a seed of doubt.
Yeah, of course.
That really matters.
Okay. So you've been involved in the big fight with the big chemical companies, and you've done a lifetime of work on food and how it's grown and what it means to us, what the health impact is. What are your thoughts for being the man of La Mancha, for tilting with windmills, that we know that the forces that we're against are just hugely powerful, and they have no idea how to change themselves. So we certainly don't have an idea of how to change them. Just to sum up, what's the target that you use? What's the goal that you set as the path that seems the most hopeful to you?
Well, I think so. Obviously, with a presidential election coming up, and the difference of a Trump win versus a Harris win, they're so dramatic. I can't deal with thinking about that. I'm putting my energy into if Harris and the Democrats have a good solid election and have control of Congress, that first year of her administration will be, in my opinion, the most promising time for historically significant changes in the Farm Bill, for a couple of reasons. Corn, soybean agriculture is tanking. The commodity groups, the chemical industry, the fertilizers, they're begging Congress for another $7-8 billion a year in subsidies so they can keep farming the way that they're farming now, because there's too many farmers that are losing money even with the current level of subsidies. So conventional ag needs a huge favor from the Congress. And if it's a good night for the Democrats, I don't see the ag committees raising the baseline. I think they're short 30 billion with the House Farm Bill, without there being some conditions and some other things. And while that fight over money, over subsidies, over what do you mean by climate smart farming? How do you measure carbon in the soil? All those other issues that are going to be commanding the attention of members of Congress, the administration, the media. That's when you can go in and fix a lot of things with non-controversial, detailed language that finds its way into different legislation. I mean, the organic, there'll be an organic title in the Farm Bill, and I think there's a broad consensus in our big tent community that there's several things that need to get fixed. I don't think there's a perfect fix that's going to satisfy everybody 100%, but I sure as hell know there's way better path forward for the organic community than what we're on now, and we could fix them all in the Farm Bill. You just write stuff into law, and then you don't have to go through a 5-year rulemaking process with the USDA that really can't say no to the Farm Bureau or the corn growers or the Cotton Council. That's so. I really hope that first year of the next administration, there's some thoughtful efforts to getting some important changes that aren't going to become national issues. They're not going to be heavily debated or really fought because all of the players in DC, they're going to be fighting the big ticket items, the big money items, right? So that, and one of the things, Dave, that is hugely important is just getting the government to generate the data that we really need now to understand where the risks are in the food system. And I mean, I'm talking about fatty acid profiles. I'm talking about antioxidants. I'm talking about mycotoxins. I'm talking about pesticides, yes, and animal drugs. I mean, across all of those issues, there's huge problems, and I think it should be possible to make some real progress in getting some new money to direct the government to just do the testing that's needed and make the results publicly available, and then look for opportunities to sort of begin moving down the road of these larger changes. And I hope that happens. And in the interim, there's a lot of good data out there to work with now, and I really am shocked at the disinvestment in the environmental and consumer public health community about food and agriculture. I mean, there was way more people in the 80s from those communities that were national players. When Dave, when we set up a hearing, and I was the staff director of the Department Operations Research and Foreign Agriculture Subcommittee. So we had oversight of all of USDA. We had the FIFRA statute, the pesticide statute. So we did all sorts of hearings on food quality, food safety, trade, pesticides, conservation. We would have lots of academics who were well respected, who would come to our subcommittee, put a lot of time into their statements, testify before the committee, and do it really, really fair, balanced job without fear of losing their getting kicked off of their tenure track because they honestly presented what their own research shows. That's over, Dave. Mm. Nobody can. I mean, some people do it, but they pay a price. And of course, there's some scientists that are senior enough that, I mean, I'm an example. There's nothing that agribusiness can do to harm me that they haven't already done a couple of times. So, at this point, it's part of what I do. But the other thing is, when we were putting together a hearing, and you might invite 6 or 8 people, you want an academic, industry, conventional, and consumer environmental point of view to be represented. There were as many people to pick from in the environment and consumer category as there was the interest groups in DC that were working on somewhere along the agriculture food supply chain. And these are people with PhDs, with published papers, that were known and had relationships with Republicans and Democrats on the committees. And now it's not the number of people in the environmental community that are doing any serious analytical work on pesticides, you can count on both hands in the country. In the country. Back when I was doing it, there were 20 people in the DC, Virginia area. So the if you want to know why does the industry have its way on all these issues, it's because they really don't have any serious opposition. I mean, EDF doesn't have anybody working on pesticides that I know of. There's one or two people in NRDC. Audubon hasn't had a serious pesticide person since Maureen Hinkle. Earth Justice, fantastic group. They do wonderful work. And they do have a lot of attorneys that are working on pesticides, but they got pesticide disasters happening all over the country where dozens or hundreds or even more people are being poisoned, and they're trying to use the law, to deal with those kinds of episodes. So it's just the imbalance is really something, and I have to say, it was ag biotech that came onto the horizon in the early 90s. That marked the beginning of the decline in work on pesticides and animal drugs and a lot of other things. That most of the foundation money, most of the Washington-based NGOs started working on ag biotech, and that persisted to about 2015, when climate change is done the exact same thing. So now if you look at what's the ag person at EDF or NRDC or the Sierra Club, what are they working on? They're all working on climate change. Why? Because that's what a lot of foundations are interested in. And so, the Bayers and Syngentas and Cortivas of the world, they say, great, we don't have anybody that's showing up at scientific advisory panel meetings. We have, Bill Fries and a few other people that write comments on behalf of the rest of the public in these rulemakings. But as hardworking as my good friend Bill Fries is, he can only cover like 1/100th of the issues that are in play at any one time. There's such a small number of people now, like Bill Fries and Michael Hansen at Consumers Union, who's been all over animal drugs and biotech and heavy metals for 30 years. There's nobody like that coming along that I know of, or maybe I just haven't met them. But yeah. The imbalance in the ability of the industry relative to the public interest community to play in these federal legislative and rulemaking and litigation arenas is so out of whack now.
Yeah. All right. Well, Chuck, we could go a lot longer, and I'm sure we will, but we probably should end now so that this doesn't become too daunting for people to listen to.
Well, just one other thing I'd like to share. One of my quandaries is given what I know, and I get opportunities to talk to people that know almost nothing to a heck of a lot. And usually I'm talking mostly about pesticides, pest management, the law, laws that affect that, because it's been the biggest and continuous focus of my career, that and nutritional quality of food. So I just struggle with how to find the balance between informing people of what I understand to be the case and know the science to back it up, which is just grim as hell. It's depressing. And a lot of people, they don't want to listen to bad information. They want to. I mean, if you look at a lot of the people that have been effective leaders in all sorts of areas, it's the people that have a sunnier disposition. They always see the glass as half full. They see it as 2/3 full when it's really 3/4 empty. And because they think it's easier to get people to change when there's a positive message.
Yeah.
And I've heard that over and over again for 30 or 40 years. And I just don't know if we're going to be able to change the system in say 2 decades. And when I started working in this area, I was like Trump. Oh yeah, we can change things in a year or two. Now I get it. You don't change these big complicated issues abruptly, even when you have a consensus on what needs to be done and politicians that are willing to take the heat. So I struggle with how to find the balance between motivating people by informing them on really how much, I guess you could say, how much better things could be, or you could say how bad they really are now. It's a real conundrum.
Yes. For me too.
All right. Well, enjoyed it.
All right. So, Chuck Benbrook, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. Our movement is growing because you're subscribing and sharing these podcasts with your friends. So keep it up and leave us a rating and a review as well so that others can find us. You can find a video version of this interview on our newly designed website, realorganicproject.org, or on our YouTube channel. And you can join us every Thursday for a new episode featuring voices from the organic movement. See you next time.